The battlefield stretched as far as Kale's eyes could see, a vast plain of mud, fire, and broken steel. Smoke curled into the gray sky, and the cries of soldiers, human and alien alike, filled the air with a dreadful symphony. Kale moved swiftly through the chaos, his boots sinking into the muck with every step, his blade dripping with blood from enemies he had already struck down. He had seen countless battles, but none like this. The alien forces were unlike anything he had faced before, their technology strange and lethal, their movements almost unnatural, yet coordinated with deadly precision. Amid the thunder of explosions and the clash of weapons, Kale noticed something moving differently from the rest of the battlefield. A small figure, stumbling and wounded, tried to crawl across the ground while smoke and sparks filled the air around her. She was wearing armor, but it was torn and scorched, and blood smeared her face and hands. Something about the way she moved made Kale hesitate. He did not usually risk himself for strangers, but instinct pulled him forward, faster than thought. A laser bolt zipped past him, cutting through the air where his head had been moments before. Kale ducked and rolled, feeling the heat graze his shoulder. Another soldier, alien, covered in black armor that seemed alive, lunged toward her. Kale's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, and with a roar, he charged. The enemy barely had time to react before Kale's blade sliced through the air, cutting deep. The creature collapsed with a hiss, and Kale grabbed the woman, dragging her to cover behind a shattered wall of stone and metal. Her body was light but trembling. She tried to rise, but her legs gave way beneath her. She was breathing hard, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice weak, almost lost in the chaos. "Kale," he said, scanning the battlefield for approaching enemies. "We need to move before they find us." Her eyes flickered at him, and for a moment there was a hesitation, as if she were trying to speak but could not find the words. "I thank you," she said finally, her voice cracking. I don't even know how I survived." "You survived because I saved you," Kale said simply, not allowing himself to feel any pride. There was no time for pride. The ground shook as explosions erupted nearby, sending shards of metal and stone flying. He hoisted her carefully onto his back. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile, but he could feel her trembling against him. They ran through the battlefield, dodging fallen soldiers and scattered debris, moving as swiftly and quietly as they could without drawing attention. The smoke burned Kale's lungs, and the acrid smell of blood and fire was everywhere. Yet, amid the destruction, Kale noticed something unusual about her armor. It shimmered faintly, as if it were more than just protective gear. It was not just functional, it was elegant, almost ceremonial. But he did not dwell on it. Survival came first. The sounds of battle faded slightly as they reached the edge of a burned forest. Trees were blackened and broken, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the gray sky. Kale set the woman down gently, kneeling beside her. She was weak, her face pale and her breathing shallow. He examined her wounds, grimacing. She had been cut deeply across the shoulder, and her thigh had a wound that might be fatal if untreated. "I can't just leave you here," Kale said, scanning the surroundings for any sign of an enemy patrol. "You have to trust me." I trust you," she whispered, though her voice barely carried. There was something about her tone, something regal and quiet, that made Kale feel a strange sense of responsibility. He had rescued many people in his life, but this was different. Somehow he felt the weight of her life on his shoulders. Kale knew they had to find shelter, somewhere hidden until the battle ended or reinforcements arrived. He spotted the ruins of an old watchtower a few hundred meters ahead. It was cracked and leaning, but it offered cover. He lifted her once more, and they moved carefully through the blackened forest, avoiding smoke and embers that still glowed from the fallen trees. Every step was tense, every sound could be their end. As they reached the tower, Kale set her down again. "Stay here." "I'll check if it's safe," he said. He crept forward, keeping low and listening. The wind carried the distant cries of soldiers and the hum of alien engines. He moved like a shadow, using the ruined walls as cover. When he returned, he saw that she had tried to stand, leaning against the wall, her hands shaking. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. I'm not just some soldier." Kale raised an eyebrow, glancing at her. "Then what are you?" She hesitated. I am Princess Alara." The words came out slowly, carefully, as if speaking them aloud made them more real. Kale froze for a moment. A princess. He had rescued royalty. Somehow that did not change what he had to do. Her survival was still his responsibility. "You're a princess," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral, though his mind raced. "Why were you on the battlefield?" "My kingdom is under attack," she said, pain flickering in her eyes. I was supposed to lead a small force to defend the city, but—" She shook her head, the weight of defeat pressing on her. "It failed. I barely escaped." Cale did not ask questions. Words were useless here. Survival, strategy, and courage mattered more than titles. He helped her sit down, finding a piece of cloth to bind her wounds. "We need to move before they find us," he said. "I don't care who you are. Alive is alive." Alara's lips curved slightly in a faint smile. "Alive, yes, that is what matters now." Hours passed as they hid in the watchtower, listening to distant explosions and the sounds of the retreating battlefield. Cale kept watch while she rested, marveling at the calm in her demeanor despite everything. He had expected fear, tears, or panic, but she was resilient, disciplined, and quietly strong. Even weak and injured, she carried herself with a dignity that made him feel protective, almost paternal in instinct. By nightfall, the smoke had cleared slightly, revealing the shattered remnants of the battlefield. Cale stepped outside, scanning the horizon. Fires burned in patches, and the stench of death was heavy in the air. Somewhere out there, reinforcements might be coming, or the enemy might be searching for survivors. Either way, they could not stay in one place for long. He returned to the tower and helped Alara to her feet. Her steps were unsteady, but determination shone in her eyes. "I should not rely on others," she said softly, almost to herself. "But you saved me, I cannot deny that." Cale smirked slightly, though his face was streaked with soot and blood. "You don't get a choice. I saved you. Now you follow my lead and we survive together." They moved under the cover of darkness, slipping through burned forests and ruined villages, avoiding patrols and traps. Cale's instincts, honed from years of surviving the worst of wars, guided them. Alara's knowledge of strategy and terrain complemented his skills. Slowly, they formed a fragile but growing trust. During a brief rest in a ruined barn, Alara finally spoke more freely. You didn't know who I was when you saved me," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "Yet you risked your life anyway. Why?" Cale shrugged. "Because someone needed saving. Titles don't matter when death is waiting." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You stayed alive because you fought. I just gave you a chance." Alara studied him carefully, as if seeing the truth of his words, and nodded. "Perhaps that is the true measure of a person, not the crown they wear, but the courage they show when it matters most." They fell into a silence, listening to the distant sounds of a dying war. Cale knew their journey was far from over. The enemy that had overrun her kingdom was still out there, and countless dangers awaited. But for the first time, he felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond survival, a reason to fight not just for himself but for someone else. As dawn broke over the horizon, the first light illuminating the scars of the battlefield, Cale looked at Alara. Her wounds were bandaged, and her face held a quiet determination. She was fragile yet strong, royal yet human, and he realized that by saving her, he had become part of something far bigger than any battle he had ever fought. The journey ahead would be perilous, full of enemies, betrayals, and unimaginable challenges. But Cale would not abandon her. Not now, not ever. Humanity had survived countless threats before, and he would ensure that this princess, and the hope she represented, survived too. Together they stepped into the uncertain world beyond the ruins, unaware that their choices, courage, and cunning would shape the fate of kingdoms, and perhaps the entire human race. The battlefield was behind them, but the war was far from over. And in that truth, Cale felt a strange thrill. Humanity might fall, might struggle, might bleed, but it would always rise again. And he would be there to make sure of it. The night was cold, but Cale did not slow his pace. He carried Princess Alara carefully over uneven ground, navigating through the blackened forest with practiced caution. Every rustle, every distant crack of a branch made him tense. The alien invaders had not left the region entirely. There were still patrols, still hunters seeking survivors, and Cale knew that if they were caught, it would mean death, or worse, for both of them. Alara struggled slightly under his grip, but she did not complain. Her usual composure was strained, yet she had learned to move quietly, letting Cale guide her. Occasionally, she whispered directions, recalling secret paths through the forests and abandoned villages that might keep them hidden. Cale realized she was more than a princess. She was a tactician, trained in ways most warriors could only dream of. They reached a narrow ravine where the forest had given way to jagged cliffs. A thin, shattered bridge spanned the gap, swaying dangerously in the wind. Cale studied it carefully. One misstep and both would plummet into the rocky gorge below. He placed Alara gently on the edge, lowering her so she could balance herself. "I can do this," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. Her hand brushed against his for a brief moment, not as a plea but as reassurance. He nodded silently and stepped onto the bridge. The old ropes creaked and groaned, but Cale moved with precision, taking calculated steps. Alara followed after him, her focus unwavering. Halfway across, a loud snap echoed through the ravine. One of the ropes had begun to tear. Cale froze, his heart racing. He turned to Alara, who had not stopped moving. "Keep going," he shouted, his voice firm. "Almost there." They reached the other side just as the rope tore completely, sending splinters of wood crashing into the rocks below. Both stumbled but remained upright, hearts pounding. Cale exhaled sharply, then helped Alara regain her balance. She smiled faintly, a spark of amusement in her eyes despite the danger. "You never know," she said quietly. "The bridges we cross in life are as fragile as these ones." Cale could only nod. He did not have time for philosophical thoughts. They needed shelter. The forest ended here, replaced by rolling hills scarred by war. Smoke still rose in the distance from the destroyed villages, a grim reminder of the enemy's reach. Cale scanned the horizon, spotting what looked like an abandoned farmstead. It was small, its walls broken and roof partially collapsed, but it would provide cover for the night. He guided Alara carefully through the tall, dead grass, each step slow and deliberate. They reached the farmstead, and Cale pushed the door open with a grunt. Dust and decay filled the air, but it was safe, for now. He set Alara down on a broken chair and began checking the building for anything that could be used as weapons or supplies. Broken furniture became barricades, old farming tools became weapons, and a rusted water barrel offered a place to rest without being seen from outside. Alara watched him work, quietly impressed. "You think like a soldier," she observed. "Even without armor or reinforcements, you make a small place feel defensible," Cale shrugged. "Survival is about using what you have, not wishing for what you don't." His voice was gruff but calm. "And right now that means keeping you alive." Hours passed as they rested, listening to distant explosions and occasional gunfire. The world outside seemed endless, filled with danger at every turn. Yet in the small, broken farmstead, they found a fragile peace. Alara leaned against Cale, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. "I never expected to be saved by a mercenary," she said softly, almost to herself. "I expected, well, I don't know what I expected. Death, probably." Cale glanced at her, noting the faint shadows under her eyes and the pale line of her lips. "You survive because you fight. That's what matters." His words were blunt, but they carried truth. "Anyone can die, not everyone fights to live." Alara studied him closely, as if seeing not just the man but the choices he had made, the battles he had survived, and the life he had carved from chaos. "You have fought for more than yourself," she said quietly. "I can see that." Cale's eyes narrowed slightly. "I fight for whoever needs it. Doesn't matter if they're royalty or farmer. Doesn't matter if anyone thanks me. If I see someone in danger, I act." Alara nodded slowly, understanding something about him she had never understood about anyone else. There was a raw, unyielding humanity in him, a courage that did not require accolades or titles. She realized that humanity itself was in men like him, not in crowns, banners, or armies. The night grew colder, and Cale kept a small fire burning in the corner of the room, using the flames to cook whatever scraps they had scavenged. Alara helped as best she could, tending to the wounds Cale had cleaned earlier. Every time she touched the bandages or adjusted a splint, Cale felt a strange reassurance, a silent bond forming between them. By dawn, they were ready to move again. Cale had scouted the area and found a rough trail that would take them through a dense forest and toward a river where he believed they could find safer passage. As they stepped outside, the sky was tinged with gray, the remnants of smoke and ash drifting across the hills. Cale noticed tracks, footprints and tire marks leading toward the farmstead. The enemy had sent scouts. "We have company," he whispered, pulling Alara behind him. They ducked behind a fallen wall as two alien patrols passed by, scanning the area with glowing eyes. Cale counted them silently, 4 in total, moving cautiously. Once the patrols moved past, he led Alara silently through the broken landscape, avoiding open ground. The forest loomed ahead, dark and thick with twisted trees. As they entered it, the sounds of the outside world faded slightly, replaced by the creak of branches and distant calls of wildlife. Cale allowed himself a moment to breathe, feeling the weight of the journey on his shoulders. He glanced at Alara, who moved quietly beside him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright and focused. Hours turned into a day. They ate little, drank from small puddles, and rested whenever they could find shelter. Cale taught her to move silently, to sense danger, to trust instincts over eyes alone. In turn, Alara shared knowledge of her kingdom, of the cities and villages that had been lost, and of the strategies she had hoped to implement to defend them. Cale listened, impressed by her sharp mind and resolve. She was a princess, yes, but she was also a leader, a fighter, and a survivor in her own right. One evening, as they set up a small camp by a riverbank, Cale noticed movement in the water. A small boat, partially hidden, was drifting downstream. He inspected it, finding it usable, though old and fragile. "We can use this," he said, helping Alara climb aboard. "If we follow the river, we'll avoid patrols and cover more ground safely." She looked at him with gratitude and trust, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," she said softly, "and yet I feel I can trust you completely." Cale's jaw tightened, his hands steady on the oars. "Trust is earned," he said simply. "You earned mine just by surviving." The river carried them quietly through the night, moonlight glinting on the rippling water. Every sound, the splash of oars, the rustle of trees, was amplified in the silence. Cale kept watch, scanning the banks for any sign of danger. He noticed faint shapes moving in the shadows, likely enemy scouts, and adjusted their path to stay hidden. As dawn approached, they came upon a small village abandoned and burned, yet offering temporary shelter. Cale guided the boat to the shore, helping Alara out carefully. They explored the remains, finding supplies, food, and clothing that could help them blend in. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. It was in this village that Cale realized something profound. Humanity was not just the soldiers who died on battlefields, nor the kings and generals who commanded armies. Humanity was in the survivors, the ones who adapted, who fought against impossible odds, who protected others even when it meant risking their own lives. Alara, fragile yet strong, was a symbol of that. He himself, scarred and hardened by years of conflict, was a reflection of it. Together, they were not just fleeing. They were proving that human courage, ingenuity, and resilience could survive even the darkest times. Night fell again, and they camped within the ruins, the stars glimmering above like distant beacons of hope. Cale kept watch while Alara rested, her head resting on his shoulder, trusting him completely. He looked at the stars, thinking of the battles ahead, the dangers yet to come, and the responsibility he carried. The princess he had rescued was more than royalty. She was hope, and humanity could not afford to lose her. And Cale, who had spent so long surviving alone, understood something he had never realized before. Saving someone else gave life meaning. Not the gold, not the fame, not the wars he had fought, but saving a life, protecting the human spirit, and proving that courage and compassion could endure even in a world full of darkness. As the fire crackled and the river flowed quietly nearby, Cale silently vowed that he would protect Alara, no matter what it cost. Humanity might face extinction, cities might fall, and kingdoms might burn. But as long as there were people willing to fight, willing to protect, and willing to endure, hope would never die. And Cale intended to keep that hope alive, starting with the princess he had saved. The river had carried them far from the burned villages, but the journey was far from over. Cale and Alara moved cautiously, knowing the enemy could be anywhere. Their boat was small, fragile, and barely more than a makeshift shield against the dangers that lay ahead. Cale rowed silently, his muscles straining as he navigated the bends in the river. Alara sat beside him, her eyes scanning the shadows along the banks. Every crack of a branch, every flicker in the darkness made them tense. They had traveled for hours in silence, relying on instinct and the faint moonlight. The stars above were bright, but even their soft glow could not hide the dangers lurking nearby. Cale kept his hand near the blade strapped to his back, ready for anything. Alara, though injured and weary, had not spoken much. She was studying the river, listening to its flow, and trying to predict the safest path. Her calm, analytical mind was a comfort, but Cale could tell she was growing tired. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye, a patrol of alien scouts moving along the riverbank. Cale froze, and Alara stiffened beside him. The patrol was small, only 3 soldiers, but they were armed with strange weapons that could fire deadly bolts in an instant. Cale had no intention of fighting them in open water. Their boat was too fragile, and the odds too uneven. He leaned toward Alara, whispering, "We go quiet. No sudden moves, just follow me." Alara nodded, her hand tightening on the side of the boat. Cale shifted the oars slightly, allowing the current to carry them closer to the shadowed edge of the bank. They moved silently, every muscle tensed, every breath measured. The patrol walked past without noticing them, and Cale exhaled in relief. Alara gave him a faint smile, one of gratitude and trust. They continued down the river, and by dawn, the first signs of human settlements appeared. Not large cities, but small communities that had survived the onslaught of war. Smoke rose from chimneys, and distant voices could be heard, a reminder that life still persisted despite destruction. Cale knew they could not stay long, exposure was dangerous. But the sight of people, alive and moving, gave both of them hope. They docked the boat in a quiet cove and moved inland, careful to remain hidden. Cale led them through dense underbrush, avoiding paths that could be easily seen. Alara leaned on him occasionally, her strength returning slowly, but her determination never waned. She had survived this long, and Cale admired her courage. It was not just her status as a princess that mattered, it was her spirit, her will to survive, and her unwavering resolve. As they traveled, Alara began to speak more openly. "My kingdom, it is not just land," she said softly. "It is people, families, farmers, soldiers, all lost in the war. I thought I could save them. I thought I could lead them to victory. But—" her voice broke slightly, and Cale waited patiently. "I failed. And yet I am still alive. Perhaps my survival is not for myself, but for something greater." Cale nodded, understanding her meaning without needing words. Survival was never just about oneself. It was about carrying hope forward, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and refusing to surrender to despair. Humanity had survived countless wars, countless disasters, because people like them refused to give up. Cale felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the strength it gave him. They reached a ridge overlooking a valley where smoke still rose from distant fires. Cale stopped and gestured for Alara to stay low. "We'll rest here for a short while," he said. "We need to plan our next move carefully. The enemy is still hunting survivors, and we can't risk being caught." Alara nodded, settling against a rock. Her eyes followed the valley below, and Cale could see the sharp intelligence in her gaze. She was analyzing every detail, every movement. "There is a village down there," she said quietly. "It may be abandoned, or there may be survivors. Either way, it could provide supplies and shelter." Cale studied the valley. He could see signs of destruction, but also faint tracks that suggested life. It was a risk, but one worth taking. "We move carefully," he said. "We cannot fight their patrols head-on, but we can use the terrain to our advantage." They descended into the valley, moving slowly and silently. The remains of houses, walls, and fences provided cover, and Cale used every skill he had learned in years of combat to keep them safe. Alara followed, listening to his instructions and learning quickly. Her understanding of strategy complemented his experience, and together they moved like shadows, invisible yet purposeful. As they entered the village, they found signs of life. Smoke from a small chimney, the sound of a child crying softly, and the flicker of lights through broken windows. Cale motioned for Alara to stay hidden while he scouted ahead. He moved cautiously, noting patrol routes and entrances before signaling her to follow. Inside one of the houses, they found a small family hiding in a basement. The parents and 2 children looked terrified but relieved to see them. Cale quickly explained their situation, careful not to frighten them further. Alara spoke gently to the children, her voice calm and soothing. Even in exhaustion, her presence inspired hope. The family provided them with food, water, and information. They had seen the alien patrols moving nearby, and Cale made a mental note of the routes and numbers. He realized that if they wanted to reach the next safe zone, they would need to travel under cover of darkness, avoiding patrols and using hidden paths. That night, as they camped in the village, Cale reflected on the journey so far. Alara had survived injuries, battles, and the destruction of her kingdom. She had endured fear, uncertainty, and despair, yet she remained determined and resilient. He realized that saving her had not just been an act of mercy, it had been an act of hope, a choice that could change the course of their world. Alara, in turn, began to see Kale in a new light. He was not just a mercenary or a soldier. He was a protector, a guide, and a living testament to humanity's resilience. He fought not for glory, not for power, but for life itself. And in that fight, he embodied the very spirit of what it meant to be human. The next day, they continued their journey, moving carefully along hidden paths and avoiding main roads. They encountered small skirmishes along the way, alien patrols searching for survivors. But Kale's skill and Alara's insight allowed them to evade capture. Each encounter strengthened their bond, each narrow escape reinforcing their trust and reliance on one another. As they traveled, Kale noticed subtle changes in Alara. She grew stronger, more confident in her movements, and more assertive in decisions. Her eyes no longer held only fear or pain, they held determination and resolve. Kale realized that she was not just surviving, she was learning, adapting, and preparing herself for the battles that lay ahead. One evening, as they rested on a hillside overlooking a distant city, Alara spoke quietly. "I have been thinking, perhaps I was wrong to believe I could save my kingdom alone. Perhaps survival, strategy, and hope must be shared. We cannot fight alone, and we cannot rely solely on armies or weapons. We must rely on people, on courage, and on the strength to endure." Kale nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "You're learning what it means to survive, to fight, to protect. And that is more valuable than any army or weapon." They watched the sunset together, a moment of quiet amidst the chaos. The sky was ablaze with color, and for a brief moment the horrors of war seemed distant. Kale felt a rare sense of peace, tempered by the knowledge that danger was never far away. Yet in that moment he understood something essential: hope, courage, and humanity could persist even in the darkest times. Their journey continued, day after day, through forests, across rivers, and over hills scarred by war. They avoided patrols, scavenged for supplies, and relied on each other in ways neither had expected. Kale taught Alara the ways of survival, how to move silently, how to sense danger, how to protect herself and others. In turn, Alara shared her knowledge of strategy, terrain, and leadership, providing guidance that complemented Kale's experience. As they traveled deeper into enemy territory, the stakes grew higher. Patrols were larger, technology more advanced, and danger ever present. Yet Kale and Alara pressed on, their bond stronger than fear. Humanity had survived countless challenges, and they would endure this one too. Each step they took was a defiance of despair, a testament to courage, and a proof of the human spirit's strength. One night, while resting in the ruins of an old watchtower, Kale looked at Alara. Her face was illuminated by the flickering firelight, her eyes steady and focused despite exhaustion. "You have changed," he said quietly. "You are no longer just a survivor. You are a leader, a fighter, and someone who inspires hope." Alara met his gaze, a faint smile on her lips. "And you have shown me what it means to trust, to fight, and to protect. Perhaps our paths were meant to cross, not by chance, but by purpose." Kale nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Together they had survived battles, injuries, and despair. Together they would continue to survive, and perhaps together they could reclaim hope for their people, their kingdom, and humanity itself. The journey ahead was uncertain, full of dangers and challenges. But Kale and Alara faced it with courage, determination, and the unyielding human spirit. Humanity had endured far worse, and they would endure this as well. Every choice, every act of bravery, every decision to protect and survive was proof that humanity would not be defeated. And as they prepared to move again, Kale felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The princess he had saved was not just royalty. She was hope, a symbol of the human spirit, and a reminder that courage and resilience could prevail against even the darkest threats. Together, they would continue their journey, forging a path through danger, and proving that humanity, against all odds, would survive. The journey had taken them through forests, rivers, and hills, each step more dangerous than the last. Kale and Alara had learned to move silently, to trust instincts, and to rely on each other for survival. Every encounter with the enemy tested their courage, their skill, and their resilience. Yet they had endured, and now, after countless nights of hiding and days of careful travel, the next phase of their journey loomed before them. reaching the heart of their kingdom to rally what remained of the human forces. As they crested a high ridge, Kale paused, scanning the valley below. Smoke still rose from destroyed villages, but in the distance, he could see signs of life. Small settlements that had survived, fighters regrouping, and faint glimmers of hope among the ruins. His heart lifted slightly. This was what they had been fighting toward, a chance to reclaim not just land, but humanity itself. Alara, walking beside him with renewed strength, looked down at the valley. "It's worse than I imagined," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But it is not lost, not yet. If we can reach the surviving forces, we can rebuild, we can fight back." Kale nodded. "Then that is what we do. We survive today, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who still believes in humanity." He adjusted the strap of his pack and checked the weapons he carried. Every piece of metal, every blade, every shot counted. They could not afford mistakes. The descent into the valley was treacherous. Fallen trees, crumbling walls, and hidden traps lay across their path. Kale moved carefully, testing each step, his eyes scanning for danger. Alara followed, learning from his movements, her instincts sharpening with every step. Together, they were a unit, silent and efficient, yet alert to every shadow and sound. Midway down, they encountered a small group of alien scouts. 4 soldiers, their black armor glinting in the sunlight, moved cautiously through the ruins. Kale pressed Alara against the wall of a crumbled building, his hand on the hilt of his blade. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We wait for the right moment." The patrol passed close by, unaware of the humans hiding in the shadows. Kale counted their breaths, timing his movements perfectly. Once the last soldier had moved out of sight, he led Alara through the narrow gaps between buildings, avoiding open ground. Every step was deliberate, every action measured. They had learned to survive not by rushing, but by patience, strategy, and courage. Hours later, they reached a small camp of human survivors, a ragtag group of fighters, families, and wounded soldiers. Kale and Alara were cautious at first. Trust was fragile in these times, and the world had grown cruel. But Alara's presence, her calm authority, inspired hope. The survivors welcomed her cautiously, recognizing her as their princess, the symbol of their resistance. Kale watched as she moved among the people, speaking quietly, listening to their stories, offering guidance and encouragement. Even in exhaustion, she radiated strength. Kale felt a mix of pride and admiration. She was no longer the fragile, injured girl he had rescued from the battlefield. She was a leader, a beacon of hope, and a reminder of why humanity fought. That night, Kale and Alara planned their next move. They would need to rally more survivors, reclaim strategic locations, and strike back against the alien forces before they could regroup. Alara studied maps and old reports, while Kale shared his experience of battlefield tactics and guerrilla strategies. Together, they devised a plan that combined her knowledge of leadership and his expertise in survival and combat. The first mission was small but crucial: retake a supply depot that the aliens had captured. It was heavily guarded, but the humans needed food, medicine, and ammunition. Kale and Alara led a small team under the cover of darkness. The air was tense, each soldier aware of the stakes. They moved silently, taking advantage of shadows and terrain until they reached the depot. The battle was swift but intense. Kale struck with precision, cutting down alien soldiers before they could react. Alara coordinated the human fighters, directing movements, providing cover, and ensuring that no one was left behind. The aliens fought fiercely, but the humans' determination, fueled by hope and the presence of their princess, was stronger. Within hours, the depot was reclaimed. Supplies were secured, and the survivors celebrated their first victory in months. Kale watched from a distance as Alara addressed the fighters. Her voice was firm, steady, and inspiring. She spoke of courage, survival, and the importance of hope. "We have lost much," she said, "but we are not defeated. Humanity endures because we refuse to surrender, because we fight for each other, because we survive when others would give up. Today, we reclaim what is ours. Today, we prove that we are human and we will not be broken." The words carried through the night, reaching every survivor in the camp. Kale felt a surge of pride. Humanity had faced extinction before, and it had risen again, and now, with leaders like Alara, they would rise again once more. Over the following days, Kale and Alara led small raids, reclaimed territory, and rescued more survivors. Each mission carried risk, but also hope. The humans learned to trust their instincts, rely on each other, and fight not just with weapons, but with courage, ingenuity, and determination. Kale noticed something remarkable. Even the weakest, the most frightened, found strength when guided by hope and purpose. Humanity's resilience was undeniable, a testament to the spirit that no alien force could extinguish. Alara grew stronger with every victory. She was no longer just a princess. She was a symbol of humanity's endurance. Kale fought alongside her, teaching, protecting, and guiding, but also learning. He realized that leadership was not just about strategy. It was about courage, compassion, and the ability to inspire others. And Alara had all of these qualities in abundance. One night, after a successful mission to reclaim another village, Kale and Alara stood atop a hill overlooking the valley below. Fires burned in the distance, evidence of battles won, and humans moved freely among the ruins, rebuilding, recovering, and preparing for the future. Kale felt a sense of accomplishment he had not known in years. They had survived impossible odds, faced overwhelming enemies, and still, humanity endured. Alara turned to him, her face illuminated by the fires below. "We've come far," she said softly. "But there is still so much to do," Kale nodded. "Yes, but every step we take proves that humanity will not be defeated. We fight, we survive, and we endure. That is what makes us strong." She smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and determination. "And you have shown me what it truly means to fight, not just for survival, but for hope, for life, for people. You are not just a soldier, Kale. You are humanity itself in action." Kale felt a rare warmth in his chest. He had always survived for himself, for the thrill, for the fight. But now, with Alara and the survivors, he understood something greater. Humanity was not just about kings or soldiers. It was about courage, compassion, and the willingness to fight for each other. Days turned into weeks. Kale and Alara continued their mission, reclaiming territory, rescuing survivors, and building alliances among human settlements. Each victory, no matter how small, reinforced the belief that humanity could endure anything. Kale witnessed ordinary people performing extraordinary acts, farmers defending their homes, children helping the wounded, elders providing guidance and wisdom. Every action was proof that humans, when united and determined, were unstoppable. During a rare moment of rest, Kale and Alara sat together by a small fire watching the stars. The world was still scarred by war, but for the first time it felt as if the darkness was receding. Kale glanced at Alara. "You have changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just for me, but for everyone we've helped. You've given them hope, and hope is stronger than any weapon." Alara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And you have given me courage, Kale. Not just the courage to survive, but the courage to lead, to fight, and to believe in humanity again. We've both learned something from each other." Kale nodded, understanding the truth in her words. They had survived battles, injuries, despair, and uncertainty. But together they had forged something stronger: trust, hope, and an unyielding belief in humanity's power. The final stage of their journey approached, reclaiming the capital, rallying the remaining human forces, and confronting the alien invaders once and for all. Kale knew it would be dangerous, perhaps the most perilous battle of their lives. Yet he felt no fear. Humanity had survived so much worse, and with Alara leading, he knew they could triumph. As they prepared for the march toward the capital, Kale reflected on how far they had come. From a battlefield where Alara was wounded and nearly lost, to the valleys, villages, and small victories that had restored hope, they had survived against impossible odds. And through it all, they had learned something essential. Humanity's true strength lay not in weapons, armies, or technology, but in courage, unity, and the refusal to surrender. The morning of their advance dawned bright and clear. Kale and Alara led their growing army of survivors, each step forward a declaration that humanity would not be defeated. Villagers, soldiers, and volunteers joined them, inspired by the courage and leadership of the princess who had survived the battlefield and the mercenary who had protected her. As they approached the capital, Kale's heart raced. The enemy forces were numerous, their technology advanced, but the human fighters were determined. Alara rode at the front, her presence commanding attention and inspiring courage. Kale fought beside her, using every skill, every tactic, every ounce of experience to protect the humans and strike at the enemy. The battle was fierce, the odds overwhelming, but humanity's resolve was stronger. Every victory, every act of bravery, Every human life defended was a testament to the enduring spirit of their species. Kale witnessed ordinary people performing extraordinary acts, and he understood the truth he had learned from Alara. Humans endured because they refused to surrender, because they fought for each other, because they carried hope even in the darkest times. When the dust finally settled, the enemy had been driven back. The capital, though scarred, was reclaimed. Humans stood victorious, not because of superior technology or numbers, but because of courage, resilience, and unity. Kale and Alara, bloodied and exhausted, looked over the battlefield, seeing the living proof of humanity's enduring strength. Alara turned to Kale, a faint smile on her lips. "We survived. Humanity survived. And we will continue to survive because we fight, because we endure, because we refuse to give up." Kale nodded, his heart full. "Yes, humanity will endure always, and as long as there are people willing to fight, to protect, and to hope, nothing can break us." Together they stood amidst the survivors, witnessing the dawn of a new era. The princess he had rescued and the mercenary who had saved her had proven something extraordinary. Humanity, against all odds, would rise. And Kale knew in his heart that this was only the beginning. The war was not the end. It was proof of life, of hope, and of the unyielding human spirit. And Kale, standing beside Alara, understood that this spirit, this courage, and this hope would never die. Humanity had survived the battlefield, and now it would endure stronger and wiser than ever before.